my Twitter followers what questions they had about learning to code, and I wanted to answer them here in video format. The first question is, what is my favorite way to learn? I could go on a huge tangent here, but something that I find really interesting is that scientifically, the idea of learning styles doesn't hold a lot of truth to it. So what actually helps is learning the same thing in multiple ways. So what I personally like to do is I like to read a blog post about something and then maybe watch a video about that same concept and then build something with it myself. So if I'm learning something new, I normally try to dive into the docs right away and play around with it, see what I can build just following that and what I can teach myself. And then if I need to go in a little bit more depth or need a little bit more formal learning, then I would watch potentially a video or look for a course. But the most important thing is building something. If I don't build something, it's just going to go out of my memory and I'm not going to actually know how to use the thing. So that's a little bit about my personal learning strategy. I learn best, I think usually blog posts are the fastest to get through and allow you to like copy paste code and things like that. Though if you're just starting out, I wouldn't recommend copying and pasting things because it's harder to remember things if you don't write them yourself. So I wouldn't just blindly copy and paste things, but I do really like written content because they allow me to parse through them a little bit faster, try out snippets of code, and I don't necessarily need to write everything from scratch. So that's me personally, but I know everybody's a little bit different. If you all have... Ooh, I got a couple questions about recursion. Okay, so recursion was definitely difficult for me to understand at first as well, but then once you get used to it, I think that for most problems, it's going to be more obvious to see the recursive solution first rather than the iterative using a loop. I think it's important to note when you are learning recursion that anything that you can do recursively, you can also do with a loop. So you can refactor a loop to use recursion, or you can refactor recursion to be in a loop. And so I would practice solving things using a loop and recursively and converting from one to another. I think that that will really help you start seeing the patterns and how things translate from one syntax to another. Another thing that I will say about recursion is that it may not be necessary to learn if it's something that doesn't click for you, especially at first, because in a lot of programming languages, writing something recursively is going to be slightly less performant than writing it iteratively. So it may be important for interviews or for like a computer science curriculum to learn recursion, but outside of that, it wouldn't be one of the things that I think is most important, because in a lot of programming languages, that function call is going to need to be stored to the call stack, whereas a loop, same is not true. And so it's going to be less memory efficient to write something recursively rather than iteratively. Maybe try translating iterative solutions to recursive solutions and see how they map to one another. But once recursion clicks, in a lot of cases, writing something recursively is going to be more developer friendly. That being said, it oftentimes will be less performant if you aren't using a language that has tail call optimization or other things built into it. So that's a little bit about my thoughts on recursion there. I love this one. Interview style question. Where do you see yourself in 3 to 5 years? I'll start by saying that 3 to 5 years ago, if you had asked me this question, I would have not said whatsoever where I am now. Things have changed wildly for me over the last couple of years. I never thought that the internet would be something. I never would have thought that I built up an online audience or that people would actually read my blog posts or anything along those lines. So that has changed my life a lot. And I think 5 to 7 years ago, there's no chance that I would even say that I would be in software still. That's the time at which I was entering the industry, and those first couple years of my career, I thought I was just gonna do it for a little bit and then transition into something else. I do think that I will stay in the tech industry to some degree, and I'm loving what I'm doing now. I'm having a ton of fun working for AWS, and I really like being a developer advocate and making my own content. That being said, I really had plans of being self-employed and being like an indie maker of creating courses and ebooks and things like that. And also doing more teaching to beginner developers. And I think that that still is my long-term goal. But things change so much. Even if you had asked me at the beginning of this year what I would be doing and where I would live, it's radically different than it is. So I'm not good at long-term plans, but I really do like the idea of being self-employed and working for myself someday. The next question is, how do I know I'm ready to start applying for jobs? And my guess is that this is coming from the perspective of somebody who's looking for their first job in the software industry, most likely from a boot camp or self-taught background. And I would say that once you've built up the fundamentals, built up a few portfolio projects that you're really proud of, and have your application materials prepped, so you have a solid resume that you're proud of, and you've got your projects really built out and a solid portfolio site. If you're from an untraditional background in tech, I would say to apply. I would say to apply to a couple places just so that you can see what the interview process is like, or what even the application process is like, and what different companies are looking for. It's never too soon to start looking and just glancing at what requirements are out there, what you might need to learn in order to get your first job. And I'm not gonna sugarcoat this. I think that getting your first developer job, especially right now, is really difficult. So I'm not gonna say that those first applications will necessarily go through, but I think that it's great to practice interviewing, see what skills that they're going to look for, see what questions that they're gonna ask, and start practicing with that as well. So please give a guide for a complete newbie. Where to start, what language, and what resources should we get for a good, not necessarily quick start. So my two favorite programming languages for absolute beginners are Python and JavaScript. Python because I think that the syntax is most straightforward for new programmers. The way that loops are done and indentation and all of that, I think that it really helps. And it was my first programming language and totally got me hooked on programming. So that would be my first suggestion, and JavaScript would be my second because building websites is very visual, and having that sort of visual feedback right away can be really helpful as well. So those are my two favorite first programming languages, and JavaScript would be in tandem with HTML and CSS. So if you want to do web development, that's the direction that I would go in. But if you want more general purpose programming, then Python would be my other recommendation. As far as what resources to start with, I think that Code Academy is really great for dipping your toes in the water and seeing what this is all about. You'll move pretty quickly through their tutorials and they're not overly challenging. From there, I've heard amazing things about Free Code Camp and their curriculum. There are a lot of self-taught developers who went through their curriculum, so I think that that would be really great. But I self-taught mostly with just a combination of things, searching things and having an achievable project, and then searching for all of the pieces that I would need to put together in order to create that project. That was how I learned. And so I would recommend that because that's what you're gonna be doing on the job as well. You're gonna be using a combination of things and finding those and putting them together to build something. I do think that some boot camps are really great as well because you will have some structure and you'll have somebody looking at your work. And I think that that's really valuable. You'll also have a built-in community of people that you're going through the boot camp with. So I would definitely vet any boot camp that you are looking into and make sure that it is a high quality boot camp and that their instructors have industry experience and have some sort of education background as well. Make sure that it's a good boot camp. But if you do, I think that it is a very valid way to learn and you'll have their career support as well. But definitely make sure that it's a solid one before going into the debt or paying that money to do that. When have you felt the most like giving up and how did you work through it? So I actually did give up. I quit computer science during my junior year of college. I had taken a couple of computer science classes and absolutely loved it at first. After looking more into it and doing more, I thought that I wasn't good enough at it and that it wasn't something that I could make a career in, that I just didn't really fit into the industry very well, and that it just wasn't for me. I wasn't smart enough, I wasn't good enough at math or whatever. I was kind of recommended to go into a software engineering program instead, and that's the only reason I fell back into it. So I have given up and gotten back into it, and I think it's good to acknowledge that it hasn't always been a smooth road for me. I didn't always think that this was going to be my career path, and it very much hasn't been. The next question is, how much computer science do you need to know? I think this is a great question and highly dependent on what type of role that you are looking into. and what type of companies that you are interested in. If you are looking into like highly web development type of roles where you're writing mostly HTML and CSS, maybe some JavaScript too, then I would say that you probably do not need to know a ton of computer science things. And most of the companies that I have interviewed at in my career have not asked about the computer science things. That being said, I personally have used a lot of the computer science things during my career. That being said, I've been able to look them up and look through algorithms and use libraries for them too. But knowing things like Big O notation has been really helpful for my career in optimizing algorithms. I've had other friends in the industry though who have said that they never use their computer science skills. So I think it's highly dependent on your role. And if you are looking to get into big tech, then most of those interviews do. If you think this video was helpful, I would love if you subscribe to the channel so that you can hear about my next videos. Also, if you throw a like on this video, it will make it so that it's shown to other people as well. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you next week.